We are live. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Today I have a very special guest, a fellow British Muslim and founder of the Thinking Muslim podcast, Muhammad Jalal. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, brother. How are you? I hope you're well.
Walaikum salam, Sister Maria. Jazakallah khair. Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be a guest on your show.
No, I'm so glad that you've come on. I know you're a lecturer in politics, and you write for various online publications on the topics of Islam and liberalism, amongst other things. And I think your content is great, brother. I've seen so many episodes of your podcast, and I must say, sort of the religious and political topics that you cover are very insightful, alhamdulillah, and they've given me knowledge about things that I may not be completely know about. And just now, as viewers will probably be aware, Muslim candidates have had a lot of success in sort of local elections around the UK, to the dismay of many right-wing critics, probably, which is a massive step in the right direction, to tackle sort of anti-Muslim bigotry in the West, especially online, which has been even more prominent with everything that's been going on with Israel and Palestine since October last year. Since the beginning of the Gaza crisis, you called upon sort of an organised effort to hold, political parties, particularly the Labour Party, to account over the genocide in Gaza. How is that going? Are you getting much success in that department?
Yeah, no, Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for your kind words about the podcast and about the campaign that you've talked about there. I mean, at the very beginning of the crisis, I think I and many others came to a realization. This was just after the October the 7th, and of course, I think all of us realized that the Israelis were hell bent on a genocide, and the war machine was in full motion within a few days. And at the very beginning, I came to a realization that we have really got a negligible position in the political scene here. So what I mean by that is when it comes to the political parties in the UK, and I'm speaking specifically to the UK, but of course we can. I've been contacted by Muslims from around the world and around the Western world, and there is a very similar reality in places like Australia and America, New Zealand, and Canada. And across Europe, of course, I had some conversations with Muslims in France and in Germany, and the problem, or my contention at the very beginning is, and still is, that we have not featured in a strong way when it comes to the politics of our countries, and so our ability to make an impact when it matters. There is a genocide going on, yet we cannot stop this genocide because we have very few levers in the political establishment to pull. In fact, I would go as far as to say that I came to the realization, I think many others did, that those Muslims who had who have tried their best, who had tried to knock on the doors of political power for the last 20, 30 years, a lot of them had failed to make an effective impact. What was happening was political parties, in particular in the British context, in 2019, 80 odd % of Muslims voted Labour. So Labour is by far the largest recipient of Muslim votes. When it comes to the Labour Party, Muslims were content, or some of our Muslim leaders were content with sitting at the table with them, having meetings, having iftars with them, going to Eid dinners. And we had mistaken access for influence. So we were accessing these politicians. They were ready to come to our mosques. They were ready to visit our Islamic schools. They were ready to engage with us. But that engagement was for their benefit, not our benefit.
Yes.
We didn't have any ability to influence them, even though we were having conversations with them, because they didn't see that as a two-way relationship. And I heard this time and time again. The politicians, in many ways, were laughing at the Muslim community because regardless of what they did, they could go to war in Iraq. They could engage in horrific policies at home and abroad towards the Muslim community. For example, Prevent, as you know, is one of the most hideous educational policies we've ever seen in the UK. And it effectively places every Muslim child under the spotlight and makes every Muslim child a potential extremist or even terrorist because of their Islamic conservative beliefs. I came to the conclusion, I think lots of Muslims came to the conclusion that regardless of all of that, they did not feel that the Muslim community were a substantial group of people that they needed to listen to,
Yeah.
because we were voting for them regardless. We
Yes.
were queuing up at the voting booths, and like they do in America, they vote Democrats, regardless of what the Democrats do. Obama can use drone warfare on Muslims around the world, in Somalia, in Yemen, in Afghanistan, but we will continue to vote Democrats. In Britain, the same was said about the Labour Party. So I think I set out at the very beginning stages to say, well, we've got to show our real weight. We have strong Muslim communities, yet we're negligible when it comes to the political system. So that's, I think, the starting point. You asked me, how's that going? I think it's going, alhamdulillah, pretty well. I mean, I think there are lots of challenges we face at a community level and at a national level. But I think, alhamdulillah, what you will find, and I can see that in the comments today, Muslims have recognized that we've got to do better. We can't just carry on voting for these war criminals, and that's what they are,
Yeah.
these genocide enablers. We've got to find a different course to really show our weight. So the simple message is, and I'll finish here, the simple message is, at the next election, we have to collectively show our weight in order for the politicians never to be complacent about the Muslim vote again.
Mm. Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, I remember as a young girl when the election used to come up, and I used to ask family members, I used to ask my uncles, my dad, my mum, who are you going to vote for? And they would always say Labour. And if it wasn't Labour, it would be Liberal Democrats. And I would always wonder why. And it was always because they are favourable towards Muslims. So we thought. And it's conditioning, isn't it? It's conditioning. You've been grown up to think that they are going to benefit Muslims. But like you said, it is a one-way street. I saw a post, another Muslim candidate, I don't know if you know Ahmed Yaqub, who was running for the mayor of West Midlands, put out, and there was members of the Labour Party that attended a Muslim man's home in order to get him to vote Labour. You know, they do that. They go to the houses to get them to vote. And he told them that he was voting for Ahmed Yaqub. And after he shut the door, his doorbell camera showed footage of them murmuring racial slurs, in particular the P word. And it was absolutely shocking behaviour. It was a woman as she was walking off, and she said this under her breath. And it's something that you would expect from maybe an extremist conservative. But like you said, these days the lines are very blurred between both parties, and you do need to look further beyond. I mean, who can we vote for? Who is going to fight for us in the UK, especially? But you know what? In real terms, what can we do? The systems are stacked up to consolidate the power of one of these two big parties. Are we really able to use the system in our favour, do you think?
Yeah, before I answer that question, it's a very good question. I just want to come back to the example you raised. Now, there's some questions about whether that did happen. So I think it's worth putting that disclaimer that I don't know. I have not looked into the matter, but there has been some debate in the national press as to whether she had actually said that. It was a young teacher who said that. But actually, that's nothing. I mean, what she said there, we are accustomed to on a daily basis or on a weekly basis. We know that happens. That's low-level racism. And that can happen whether you're a conservative or you're Labour or even the Liberal Democrats. I mean, I've seen yesterday, I was in a conversation with some brothers, and they were telling me that, internally, even in the Green Party, there is a disdain sometimes for Muslims. So you will find that type of visceral racism exists in all of the political parties. But that's not really the bigger problem here, believe it or not. The bigger problem is, in the same way, they recognize or do not recognize the legitimacy of Gazan life, because they see them in a hierarchy of human living, far less than they are, far less than the European liberals or European white culture. In the same way, they delegitimize the lives of Muslims in Gaza or Palestinians in Gaza. They see us in the same way, and that's more insidious. They do not believe that Muslims. When I first started to talk about the Muslim vote, I had so many contact me and say, and almost imply, well, you should know your place. You are a guest in this country. I was born in this country, but you are a guest in this country. You've got no right to take over the political system. You have no right to use the ballot box for your own your own sectarian needs. They called. I mean, Nigel Farage would say this on a repeated basis on his show on GB News. So I think that there is the visceral racism that we may encounter, but there is a more covert supremacy. Let's call it a supremacy, a European supremacy that is voiced by Labour, Conservative, Liberals, and actually all of the political parties have an element of this, because they can't see and they can't believe that a Muslim, a brown person, a black person could have the same intelligence and the same legitimate rights to utilize the ballot box as they do. And that's implicit, and we can see that everywhere. Now, in answer to your question, whether in real terms, what can we do? One of the things that I recognized at the very beginning of this crisis is that our data is pretty poor. In other words, we don't actually know a lot about our Muslim community and where they are and how they can impact the ballot box. Okay. So I think back in October, it's probably mid-October, just mid to late October, I sent out a tweet thinking that maybe one or two people will respond. Alhamdulillah, I got a great response. And the tweet was something like, I need some data scientists to help me, because we have got very poor data on the Muslim electorate. And alhamdulillah, I had a deluge. There were people from around the country, in fact, people from abroad, who had got certain skill sets, who helped to devise and put together data about the Muslim community. And what we discovered, in a very general sense, is that there are over 100 constituencies if we really got our act together. And I'm going to put that in a lot of asterisks and say to you that if we got our act together, and I think everywhere I go, that's the running joke. We can never get our act together. I don't believe that, but that's the running joke. That everywhere I go, people say, well, you can't, Muslims have got to a parlor state where we can't even organize a prayer in a mosque, is the phrase one brother used. If we get our act together, there are over 100 seats where we hold the balance of power. And that simply means that we can determine which political party can come to power in that constituency. Now, in most elections, we know that the difference between the winning party and the second party is often not even 40 or 30 seats. That means actually, in reality, Muslims hold the balance of power in possibly every election if we really worked collectively in a united way and showed our political weight. The problem is we're not doing that because too many of our leaderships, and I will be very blunt and say this, too many of our leaderships are in the pay and who are gatekeepers for the Labour Party in our communities. They do the bidding for the Labour Party. They serve the Labour Party. In previous years, we would have in the Indian subcontinent called them punkawalas, right? People who are ready to fan the colonial masters, regardless of what they do to them. Yeah. And my contention is that we have to undermine this perverse leadership that exists and remind them that they have a duty to the Muslims in Gaza, and they should never be voting for Labour. There should be not a single vote the Muslim community gives to Labour or the Conservative Party, for that matter, in this coming election, regardless of what their MPs say, because as long as they're part of this structure that endorses the systematic genocide of the Palestinian people and other Muslims around the world, we shouldn't forget, how they have contributed to what can only be termed as crusades in the Muslim world, or colonialism in the Muslim world. Until and unless we are able to move beyond these community leaders who constantly do the bidding for the Labour Party in our constituencies, in our communities, we're not going to proceed. So that's your question was, can we really move away and break away from these two big parties? I say yes, we can. And that's not just hopeful thinking. I say yes, we can, because the data tells us we can.
Yeah.
I spoke to, one last point, I spoke to an ex-member of the Momentum movement. If you remember, Momentum was the Jeremy Corbyn, the leftist movement in the UK. And I sort of explained this to him. I showed him a little bit of the data and said, look, here's where we are. And he said, look, you guys have got concentrations that we don't have in the left. And you've got places like the mosque in Jummah and outside, you've got places where people come to where you can communicate with them. Now, of course, from charity rules, you can't communicate party politics within a mosque, but you can stand outside a mosque and meet hundreds and hundreds of people every week. We don't have anything like that in the general left. So what's my point is, we have probably the best demographic to make an impact, not just for us, by the way, but for all humanity, all people in this country. And I think we should be doing that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, it's interesting because growing up when I was at uni, politics, I just didn't care about it because of the issue of doesn't matter who we vote for, we're never going to get someone representing us. And I think a lot of people have that view as well, and people actually just don't vote or don't educate themselves or don't look into it. And as I grew up, and now obviously with everything going on, I've definitely educated myself more, and I do encourage other people to do the same, because like you said, if we come together, that's the only way that we can actually make a difference, is if we educate one another and show that we can actually stand together. And we've stood together in such a good way for Gaza and for Palestine, and why can't we do it for this country? And like you said, people do say, you're a guest in this country, and I agree. It's disgusting. I mean, I was born here, my mom and dad were born here, and if it wasn't for our ancestors, this country might not have built itself back up. So it's very, very real conversations that we do definitely need to have. I know that Muslim candidates have had success in places like Burnley and Leeds and Bradford and London, etc. But Leeds in particular, the Green Party councillor Mohsen Ali had an issue. He had to issue an apology after his local election victory for saying Allahu Akbar, and this win is for the people of Gaza, because some people, mostly Zionists and Islamophobes, were offended. I'm sure you've heard about that. I don't personally think he did anything wrong. I don't think he should have apologised, and that sort of brings me to sort of my next question to you. Are we just merely allowing a corrupt system to continue by calling for its participation? Like, are we just participating in this? Like you said earlier as well, the leadership has to change.
Yeah. No, I think you've got a very perceptive point. I mean, it is a corrupt system. There's no doubt about it in my mind. The system is stacked up against not just us, but anyone that calls for justice, because the system, the way it works is it's what we call a two-party duopoly. And so one party ends up implementing the capitalist policies, the policies that serve the corporates and the elites. And then when the public get tired of that one party, another party comes into place who does the same. And as long as you've got the illusion of choice, you think that you're moving from one party to another, you think that you live in a democracy. There is no democracy here, and it's a delusion if you believe that the two-party system offers choice in Britain. At the moment, Keir Starmer you can put a cigarette paper between him and Rishi Sunak in terms of policies. There's nothing really that separates them, except Keir Starmer knows that the public are sick and tired now of the Conservatives. And so by default, he's going to come to office, and he will come to office, but by default, he'll come to office because everyone is now tired of the Conservative Party. And I think that's really where we are in this country. Now, your point is the system is corrupt. So are we not just given a lifeline to the system by voting? Well, I'm saying to you, you've got to go into the election knowing full well that this system is corrupt, right? So you don't go into it thinking, I'm voting because I believe that this system is so perfect and everything I do from this point onwards is going to create an even more perfect system. You're doing it because you want to disrupt that system. You don't want a pro-Zionist, a pro-Israeli MP to take over. I mean, just today, for example, in Selly Oak, Birmingham, there's been an announcement of a candidate, Kamal Hawash. He used to be the Palestine Solidarity Council chair. He's a professor at Birmingham University, so he's in that Selly constituency. It's a large student population, and
Mm.
he's announced his candidacy against Steve McCabe. Steve McCabe is the head of Labour Friends of Israel. Okay, so we've now got a very prominent professor who's going to stand against the head of the most insidious, and I would call it insidious, pro-Israeli organization within the Labour Party. That's the sort of person we need. We need to have people like this who have got principles, who stand against these warmongers, these people who are rubber stamping genocide. And so, in answer to your question, we're not going into this thinking that somehow our participation is to uplift or to bring greatness. Let me rephrase that. Our participation will somehow encourage a wonderful system. We're going into it knowing, showing the frailties of that system. We want people to be elected to parliament who are uncorruptible,
Mm-hmm.
who care about Muslims, who care about life, who care about justice,
Mm-hmm.
because these people have abdicated their responsibility. Every single Labour MP and Conservative MP who obeys the party whip have abdicated their responsibility towards justice.
Yeah.
And so it's our responsibility to turn that around, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think when we participate in these things, we can't expect something to change drastically, but it is the little things in the little places that might make a difference. I mean, you've seen on a national level, though, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, and former Scottish First Minister Hamza Yusuf were quite liberal in their politics. I was quite sad to see Hamza Yusuf go because of the way that he was fighting for Palestine. But he was quite liberal in it. And I'm guessing that's a strategy to gain popularity, and that sort of trickles down to a local level also, where Islamic values sometimes are compromised. Do you really believe that Muslim communities are up for this challenge? We know that there are too many at a local level that can be bought. I mean, how do we change that narrative?
Yeah, I think it's a good point you make about these two Muslim representatives, because we have to admit they've had to compromise, sometimes in a very big way, in order to remain relevant. I mean, Sadiq Khan is probably Exhibit A when it
Yeah.
comes to compromise, and I would never have voted for Sadiq Khan in London, I'm afraid, and that's simply because even his views towards Gaza were very lukewarm. If you put side by side his activism for Ukraine with Gaza, it pales into insignificance. Gaza actually, is not particularly high up on his list. He's just done enough to show that he's relevant. So I'm afraid I'm not convinced that he is actually, even on that one issue,
Mm.
been a particularly good politician. And why is that? It's because structurally the party system makes you compromise until you become a shadow of your former self.
Mm.
The party system is such that it makes you, to rise to the top, you've got to make salami slices. Your iman has to be salami sliced. Your view of justice has to be salami sliced. And what I am arguing here is that we have to go beyond this. It's
Mm.
not going to be the case that joining any of these mainstream parties and fielding candidates on behalf of these mainstream parties will actually effectively give us a representative that's going to serve our interests and the interests of the wider community and wider society.
Mm.
And that's why I feel that there needs to be a fresh look at British politics. Now, by the way, it's not going to happen in this next election. I am a realist. I know that it takes a lot of effort and a lot of organizing to do that.
Mm.
But we have to start, and we have to change the narrative towards representation. Just because a brown face is representing us, that doesn't mean that brown face or that black face or that ethnic minority is actually going to be someone who truly represents us.
Yeah.
I speak to members of the community, the black community in Haringey, and they have very similar concerns towards David Lammy. He's the shadow foreign secretary. And
Mm.
if you think about David Lammy, he's from the local area, but his politics has moved so far away from the local community that he's unrecognizable. They don't recognize this black politician to be someone who truly represents and echoes and mirrors the travails of ordinary people who are suffering and living in these communities. And so, from my side, I think we're up for the challenge, and I think in particular the younger generation are up for the challenge. I mean, I'm pretty heartened by. I was in Scotland a month or so ago, giving a talk to some young Muslims, and I was amazed at how much their thought process, their worldview, is different to the people I meet sometimes in the local communities, maybe the more elderly population, who've got far more deference towards the political system. They're ready to demonstrate, and they're ready to mobilize, and they're ready to use their vote to disrupt. And I think that's a good place to be.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has got to do with the internet and social media. I know, like in particular, my dad doesn't have social media, he doesn't even have a phone with a camera on it properly. So, all of his sort of information comes from mainstream media, which we know is just completely corrupt. And I think social media does play a part in allowing us to see what's really happening. And I think that's why the younger community do want to have a bigger voice, because they can see it in real time, especially with what's happening in Israel and Palestine. But one thing I did want to ask you is, do you think that, whoever does, if we voted a party member to come into power, do you think that they could also be corrupted? I mean, it seems to be the sort of pattern when someone comes into power, you think they're going to do something and then slowly they change, like you said. I mean, do you think that that's going to happen to the majority, or do you think there are Muslims or ethnic minority people out there that will stick to their guns? Because I think that to stay in this political system, you maybe have to dance to their tune to stay in it. No?
Yeah, it's a very good point. And one can never say never. I mean, of course, even in a perfect scenario, not that there are ever perfect scenarios, but even in Islamic history, we know that many Muslim politicians had succumbed to corruption and succumbed to tyranny and succumbed to injustice. So it's not correct for us to believe in some sort of utopian format, and then we stick to that. What I would say, however, is that the major reason why politicians are corrupted is because of the way the political party systems work. To make your way through those political parties, you have to slowly slice away your belief system. So I'm saying that where possible, and it's not always possible, where possible, where we've got a good concentration of Muslims, for example, argument's sake, Birmingham Ladywood, or Perry Bar, for example. Now, these are two constituencies in Birmingham that have Muslim representatives that have sold out the Muslim community time and time again. Shabana Mahmood and Khalid Mahmood. These are not representatives or politicians that really serve our interests at all. Yet we have got near 50% of those constituencies are Muslims, are Muslim constituencies. So why can't we mobilize that constituency to bring an independent MP to Parliament who more fairly reflects you and I? I think it's fair to say, Sister Maria, that if you ended up being a politician tomorrow, you probably care more about your community and your people, and you'd care more about the truth than some of these people do, because they've been through a system which has told them that the truth no longer matters.
Yeah.
I feel that we have to bring good quality representation to the Muslim scene. I mean, I'll give you another example of this. There is a Palestinian candidate, Liane Mohammed in Ilford North, who's going to be standing against Wes Streeting. These are the sorts of people we need. These are people who are noble, and they think about justice, and they're not concerned about the grubby business of power and money. These are the sorts of candidates we need in our Muslim communities across the country, inshallah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us all to conduct ourselves in a proper Islamic manner, and to, fight for justice. I'd like to sort of shift to the sisters, if that's okay. Muslim women in the West have a very strong voice. We are growing as well. A lot of non-Muslims are becoming Muslims, are women too. We're seeing that, increase as well. Many of my viewers are Muslim women. Historically, politics was seen to be the prize of community elders who are male. Can women play a part? I mean, how can we play a part in this?
Yeah, I think that's really important because often I have found, and again, I've been traveling the length and breadth of this country where when I can to meet with communities. But what I found is often it's young, not young only, but Muslim women who are far more articulate,
Hmm.
who get it far more quicker, who understand the need to forge an independent path, who are more ready, by the way, sometimes to knock on doors and to meet with others and to tell them about candidates. And that's partly because, often that in communities, it's the women that make up, the sort of bedrock of the community. They bring everyone together. They bring families together. They bring communities together. So, I get that. But I feel that we sometimes downplay the relevance or the importance of women in political activism in our communities. And I think we need to change that.
Mhm.
You're right in saying that historically, uh, politics has been the prize of a particular type of man, and I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm not saying that shouldn't exist, but I'm saying that there is a massive space for women to engage in politics, and actually a massive space for women to engage in a type of political uh, community activism that sometimes men can't do. Women can reach larger numbers of people through family networks and through community groups and through nurseries and through whatever it may be. They can reach larger numbers of people. Not only that, I think that, someone yesterday said to me about having a Palestinian hijab wearing woman who enters parliament, like Liane Mohammed, for example. He was a Palestinian. He was an elderly man. I hope he doesn't mind me saying that. He was an elderly man, but
Mhm.
he said to me, "Look, even if she said nothing for the next 5 years, she became an MP and she said nothing. When these people are signing off the contracts to and the legislation to drop bombs on Gaza, they're going to have to look at her in the eyes and say, 'This is what we're doing.'"
Hmm.
And just her presence will make these people feel a sense of guilt for what they're doing. And I think that's really true. I didn't see it like that. I
Mhm.
said, no, no, someone has to go in there and make the case for Palestine and Gaza. He said, no, no, even if she stays silent, even if there's not anything beyond that, um, um, you're going to make a seismic change in the way. It's like, I think it's almost like when the first working class politicians entered parliament in 1901.
Hmm.
That had a major impact because, of course, parliament was used to be a place for middle class, upper class men to talk about world affairs. These working class people suddenly entered, and
Hmm.
it changed the dynamic of parliament. That's what I think we should be aiming at, just changing that dynamic of parliament. It's not going to be quick. It's going to take some time, but I truly believe we have it within our capacity to do that.
Yeah, inshallah,
Yeah.
and I hope you're right. And I think one person is not enough, like you said. We need to have a lot more people in there that will represent us, just to even put down a vote. In the way that the voting happens sometimes for
Mm.
certain legislations, if we've got someone that will vote for us. Alhamdulillah for Islam, male female gender roles are clearly defined, and even Islamically, politically, we've seen there are many great women, Hazrat Aisha, for example, that done so much. So women are not on the back burner. We need to support each other within these roles, and not be influenced by sort of Western gender
Yeah.
wars. I know that nearly 40,000 people have lost their lives in Palestine from October 2023 until now, and
Yeah.
you've seen recently sort of the senseless violence that continues with Israel now attacking Rafah. It's so tragic, and there's only so much that you can do. You can keep raising awareness, but it just seems to be getting worse. Every time you think it can't get any worse, it does. Do you really think the West will change their foreign policies towards Palestine and support Arab dictators, or do you not see that happening? Because I've also seen the Arab world not really
Yeah.
fighting for them either, which is quite sad. Why would the West?
We have to make them uh, we have to make sure they do that. So I would say never say never.
Yeah.
If you have in the next, so the way to think about the next parliament, you could either give the Labour Party an 80, 100, 120 majority, which would mean Keir Starmer, who's a very authoritarian leader, can do anything in the Muslim world and beyond. or you can work to lessen his majority. And you
mm,
do that by voting tactically so that the Labour Party lose seats across the country. If they have a slim majority or no majority at all, their ability to wage war, which is what they do all the time, their ability to wage war will be lessened.
mm,
So I think we do have it within our gift to lessen the majority that Keir Starmer gets in the next election, which he's going to win it probably, and it seems to me that he's going to form the next government. But we have to lessen that majority as much as possible. So I think that we can change their policies, but we can't change it naively.
mm,
Writing a letter to an MP is not going to change government policy. I'm saying it's a good thing to do, and fine, you should do it, but I don't think alone is going to change policy. Having iftars, like there was a group called Concordia, who, as you know, had that iftar with Keir Starmer at the height of the genocide. Ridiculous, made no sense, and it was obviously just for their own self-gratification that they were the ones who Keir Starmer invited in, and so they thought they can gain some benefit from it. And they may want to quote it in more illustrious ways, but that's simply it. It was grubby politics they were playing. So that type of politics we don't need. What we need is good strategic politics where we can gain a critical mass in parliament, so that it becomes impossible for these people to wage their wars because they don't have the majorities to do so. And I
yeah.
think that's really where we have to be.
Yeah, and then that's a smart way of thinking, and it's sad that you think that that we think the Labour Party will come in. I see it too, but who else is there? That's sort of what people say.
Yeah.
But, talking about Palestine, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for our brothers and sisters in
Ameen.
Palestine, and I hope everyone will keep donating and posting and raising awareness, and most importantly, keep them in your du'as after every salah. Every little bit matters, every little bit counts. We've spoken about sort of the sketchy conduct of the Labour Party recently and historically. I don't think, like we said, they have, Muslims' best interests at heart. Do you believe there are people in our community that should continue to work with the Labour Party and maybe try and make a difference from the inside? Is that possible at all?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I feel that that's a fool's errand.
Mm,
You believe that you're doing something and they will contain you. See, the way the system works is as long as they've got a few people within their party structure who seem like they represent the Muslim community, for argument's sake, it gives the pretense, it makes it, the charade of democracy remains, the charade that somehow we're making an impact remains. We have to break that charade. We have to tell them that we no longer care for working within their own corrupt systems. And actually, we're going to work external to that. So I think the more Muslims work within the Labour Party, the more they continue the charade of this very corrupt political system.
right.
So my view is that give up your membership, tear up your memberships,
Mm,
make it very clear that you're not going to be voting Labour. Make it very clear that you're going to be running independents in your communities.
mhm,
Make it very clear that you don't care what they think of us anymore. And
mm,
it doesn't matter to you that if the Labour Party, see the problem that a lot of Muslims have, and I've met with communities who've got this real fear that the Labour Party will punish us
mm,
by not giving us mosque extensions and by not giving us toilet extensions or whatever we ask for in a local community, whatever ridiculous claim we have while a genocide is going on. Um, my view is that you're going to have to accept some pain because the Muslims of Gaza and the Palestinians are accepting a lot of pain.
yeah.
And if we believe, we say frivolously that they are our educators and the Gazans have taught us how to live. Well, if they've taught you how to live, then you have to relinquish some of your privileged lifestyles for
Yeah.
a little while in order for us to make a greater impact. Nobody's saying here that we should become a fifth column or we should, that's far from it. We want to make an impact in this country that really matters.
Mm-hmm.
But to claim that the Labour Party will punish you if you leave them en masse, or if you don't vote for them, or there should be a few people
Mm,
within the sinking ship, so that we can illustrate to them that we're still part of their colonial enterprise. I think that's a fool's errand. Let's think more deeply.
mm,
We suffer from a political naivety, a lot of political naivety in our Muslim community. And I think we should move beyond that. And the great thing is, young Muslims in particular are willing to go beyond that because they can see the
mm,
possible. They can observe they're no longer restricted by the same tensions and feelings that their parents and their grandparents had, maybe justifiably, because of the intense racism and prejudice they faced. So we are a young community, and I really truly believe that young Muslims are going to make the biggest difference, inshallah ta'ala, over this next decade.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely lucky, like you said, compared to our parents and our grandparents. We've definitely got more of a voice, and we've got more of a sort of freedom because we know this country. You know, our parents, our grandparents didn't know much about it. They maybe came from Pakistan or from other countries, and that was what they knew. And because we've grown up and we've been born here, we know how it works, how the system works, and how people work. So we have that advantage. But sort of talking out with Labour and Conservative, I know we were talking about independent parties. We saw a fellow Scot, George Galloway, become MP for Rochdale in the 2024 by-election. I've always been a fan of George Galloway, so has my family. Mr. Galloway has been very sympathetic to the Palestine cause and Muslims in general for many, many years, not just since October 2023, and I have a lot of respect for him. What do you think about Muslims supporting George Galloway and the Workers' Party?
Yeah, I'm really conflicted. Actually, conflicted is the wrong word. I think that we can do it alone, and I'm saying that because I'm not particularly endeared towards Galloway's politics. Now, Galloway can be, and it has been, quite good on Gaza and Palestine, no doubt about it, and we can see that for many years. But at the same time, Galloway denies that there's a Uyghur genocide taking place. He went on Russia Today, and he said that the Chinese government are fighting a war on terror against Uyghurs who are terrorists. That's unacceptable. Galloway is pro-Assad, and he's got on record to say that Assad is fighting an anti-imperialist struggle against terrorists again in Syria. So I think we have to be very careful who we embolden within our communities, because in our mind, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will question us about being just. And if we forsake our brothers and sisters in these other hotspots in the world, it's not, by the way, just Syria and Uyghurs. He's got a track record. He denies the Srebrenica genocide. He says that nothing like that existed, and that Serbia were fighting a honest war against terrorism, or against American-inspired militias, is how he sees it, right? So there are some people within the wider political makeup who see the world not from a perspective of justice and injustice, as we are told to do in Quran, but they see the world from a perspective of West and anti-West. Now, when you see the world from that perspective, anyone, even Assad, who is brutal and who kills his people, who comes across as being anti-West, then you've got to support him. Or the Chinese government, you've got to support them. And I think that's, for me, that's not principled. I think we need to remain principled in our politics. So my advice is, don't go there. I don't believe that it's correct to support people like that. And actually, more importantly, it doesn't make any sense. Galloway in Rochdale in the last election won 13% of the popular vote. He came fourth after the two big parties, and he came close, I think third, in fact, just behind the Liberal Democrats. Apart from his particular way of his style and his persona, he doesn't have quality candidates anywhere in the country, or most places in the country. We have got quality people in the country. We have got good quality Muslim, Palestinian, even non-Muslim. Andrew Feinstein comes to mind in Holborn and King's Cross. Principled man who's worked against the arms trade and very pro-Gaza. These are the sorts of people we should be defending. Pamela Fitzpatrick in Harrow West, for example, Harrow East or West, or one of them, for example. So I feel that we've got to try to make sure that the best candidates win it. Otherwise, and best candidates go forward. Otherwise, we're not really going to win this. And we have to win it for Gaza, and we have to win it for the Muslim Ummah, and we have to win it for the general community around us.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I didn't know that information about him, which just goes to show that you can't take people on the face surface. You do really have to do your research about what they've said in the past and where they stand in a lot of issues. So that is quite eye-opening. Thank you for letting me know that. I didn't know that. And I know that, there's sort of many local communities around the UK that may be unsure about sort of their role and how they can participate. And like I said, who can they vote for? Who can they trust? How, in general, how does a local community decide what to do? Can you give us guidelines on, can we trust this person? Do we think this person is going to help us? How can we get together as a community
Yeah.
to make things better?
Yeah, it's a difficult one to answer because, of course, every local community has its own dynamics. All local communities have their own ways of doing things. And of course, there aren't any central, anyone who claims that I am the local community or I'm the head of the local community is really, presuming a lot, because that doesn't exist. The Muslim community are lawyers and educators and mums and dads and grandfathers and taxi drivers and mosque committee members, and the Muslim community is very diverse. And if one section of that community claims they own the community or they have the Muslim vote, you can tell for sure that they're fibbing. That just that doesn't sit well with me. What needs to happen really is that groups of Muslims have to come together in local community, and they've got to include people. They've got to include mothers. They've got to include women. They've got to include doctors. They've got to include others and professionals and non-professionals and taxi drivers and laborers. They've got to include everyone, and they've got to bring them together and make sure that these communities engage in putting to the fore or bringing together good quality candidates. And that's happening, by the way. I mean, for example, Luton comes to mind. There's I hope she doesn't mind me saying this, but there was a very courageous sister, actually, Sister Rahana, who has been at the forefront of making political noise during this entire 7 or 8 months. She's really been holding the Labour Party, Labour councillors, Labour MPs to account for their silence. And she's got a great initiative in Luton to bring together lots of different elements of Muslims and non-Muslims, by the way, so that they can form a panel to appoint and to select a good quality candidate to fight the election in Luton. Now, you've got that may be one way, and sometimes that's a good way. In other ways, you've just got an obvious choice. Kamal Hawash, as I just said, who's going to go forward in Selio. He's the obvious choice because he's a Palestinian candidate. He's got a lot of credibility amongst the student population, and so why wouldn't we defend and vote for such a person? So I think it's got to be through local community organizing, but how we get there, it will come down to how that community functions and works. What we don't want, however, are chances, and there are lots of chances out there, I'm afraid. People who ride the wave of Gaza, they can see that Gaza has created this new consciousness, and now what they want to do is capitalize on that for their own political ends, and that's not what we want. And we should be able to spot these people a mile off, I think.
Yeah, no, it's really good advice, and I hope that local Muslim communities can implement it, inshallah. I do want to say that, the amount of people that I've seen come out in support for Gaza, Muslim and non-Muslim, has been, amazing. I mean, you see videos every day online on social media about people really fighting for the Gazans, and I that really warms my heart whenever I see someone. We've seen a lot of that, of student activism in the West as well, linked to Palestine recently. I don't know if you saw, there was a large public gathering of students participating in Salah on a university campus out of respect. And there was, I think, a mixed reaction online, due to how some of the non-Muslim women were dressed. But on the other hand, there was a lot of positive feedback as well. And we have to look at the bigger picture and see, how we're all coming together. What are your thoughts about, the student activism that we've seen there? So it seems to be a reluctance from Islamic societies to get involved. What accounts for this? Do you have any views?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. I mean, I fear that what's happened over the last 20 years of the war on terror is the Muslim community have been forced to self-censor. And one of the places where we see that are university campuses. And so we've been depoliticized, you can say, on university campuses. So it's a perfectly acceptable activity to do tarbiyah sessions or dua sessions, or to which is, alhamdulillah, we need to do, and to have salah for for those who are in trouble and make lots of dua for them, but at the
Yes.
same time to organize and to engage in debate, engage in demonstrations and protests, and to call for universities to not put their money into Israeli companies and weapons companies that provide Israel. That seemed to be a bit too far, because prevent and other forms of very insidious policies have undermined Muslim student activism. So I think that's breaking, and alhamdulillah, I see that there are lots of young Muslims who are now moving, who've broken through that
Yeah.
that barrier, that invisible barrier, where they felt that it was impossible for Muslims to get involved with politics. And I'm seeing a lot more of that. We saw that in American campuses. Actually, lots of Muslim MSAs, the equivalent of our Islamic societies, are involved. I spoke to one member of the MSA umbrella committee who was telling me that, in the United States, it's actually the MSAs, the Islamic societies,
Mm.
that are leading a lot of these protests on these encampments on university campuses. We see some of that in the UK, but I fear that, or I feel that we need to see more. And I think it's down to this reluctance for the reasons I've just explained. And we've got to try our best. I spoke to a father the other day. He's mashallah, a very, dare I say, very middle class man. His son goes to university. And he was saying to his son, look, why aren't you involved in any
Mm.
of these? Your university is complicit. Why
Mm.
don't you get involved? He's the father, it was a surreal
Mm.
sight. But a father was saying, I can't, this is unacceptable that your Islamic society, all they're doing is having Bukhari sessions, which
Yeah.
alhamdulillah is great, yet there's a genocide going on.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense. So I think we need to encourage them, and we need to give them the knowledge and the know-how to engage in student activism, I feel.
Yeah. But the other question I was going to sort of ask you on the back of that was, I'm a Muslim mum. I've got two very young daughters. They're 3 and 1, and I speak to many Muslim parents, and we're all very worried about what's going on in the West and how our children are going to grow up, and especially in schools, etc. So, how do you think that we can educate our children from this young age
Yeah.
to make a difference? And how do you think that we can encourage them to fight for the right thing?
I think you see, when we talk about the term tarbiyah,
Mm.
we often think that tarbiyah is simply the act of teaching our children the abstract. Now, remind me of abstract. I don't mean that in a sort of negative way, but the abstract Islamic knowledge, right? So we teach them Quran and Hadith, or we teach them the practice of Islam, and that's really important. These are really important duties that we need to teach our children. But of course, the Sahaba Ridwanullah alayhi were not just people who learnt knowledge and who engaged in what we would term the worships aspects of Islamic practice. But it's always marvelous to me to contemplate how within 13 years of Mecca and then 10 years of Medina, these young Sahabi, and most of them were young, these young Sahaba were able to become statesmen and politicians, and they were able to go to far off lands and to meet with the kings and the emperors of this world. And that tells me something about how they understood Islam.
Mm.
If Islam is understood as just a set of religious principles, then of course we're going to be no different. We're going to be colorless,
Mm.
and our iman is not going to go beyond and not going to venture into what we call justice areas. But if we are cognizant of what the Islamic belief system is really about, our iman requires us to engage in politics. Our iman it requires us to call for justice. Our iman requires us to be those
Mm.
sorts of people in the world who want our children not just to be well off and to have good, comfortable lives and to be educated. That's fine. That's really, really important. But we want our children ultimately to bring justice to this world. We
Mhm.
want them to sacrifice, and we want them to be leaders and political leaders. Why not?
Yeah.
It took a generation or two to build a Salahuddin, And Salahuddin Ayyubi, rahmatullah alayh, did not come about by chance. He came about because of a strong tarbiyah process that was developed within his society.
Mm.
And I fear that we need to engage in that sort of tarbiyah process. I mean, there's a great there's a sister, alhamdulillah, I interviewed, inshallah, the show will go out tomorrow, Sister Dr. Amina Sharif. And she probably speaks to this in a far more articulate way than I have, but she talks about how part of the show so the show is on the uh, the um, the way in which British schools, they delegitimize and undermine the Muslimhood of young Muslims, right, or the sense of identity of young Muslims. So it's a very hard-hitting show in that sense. But she then talks about how we can reverse this, and what the responsibility of parents to build and develop and nurture the right type of understanding of Islam within our children, so that they do fight for justice. And I have to say, like, sometimes I come across young Muslims who are ready to do that, and alhamdulillah, I'm heartened by these. And then sometimes I come across young Muslims who don't care about it. I mean, there is a Gaza genocide going on, and they can't even send out a tweet or
Mm.
send out. And I would say, and yet they may be very Islamically very schooled and very educated. And I would say that these people have a problem. This is not where the study of Islam should have taken you to a place where you see a genocide taking place and you're
Mm.
not willing to
Yeah.
engage and be active.
Hmm.
And that doesn't mean be reckless. And I'm not saying we should do things which go against our religion and our ethics. That's for sure not. But I do believe that we have to get involved, and young Muslims and all Muslims have to be participating
Hmm.
in raising the awareness and also engaging politically.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, we see it when it comes to things like Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement. These people jump right onto it. And then when it comes to our Muslims and our community and our Ummah, they take a step back. So we do need to look at our priorities. But like I said, I think that does start with the parents, and it does start with how you bring up your children, and, where they go and who their friends are, etc. So we do have to make a big difference from the top up. There's no doubt that, these are both tense and exciting times for Muslims in the West and globally as well. And I think
Yeah.
social media, like I said, has been a game changer for us and our message, to get it out there and influence and educate both Muslim and non-Muslim people. And I think this is the first time, I don't know about you, but for me, that I've seen a war, if you can call it that, a genocide, that you've seen it so blatantly obvious. I know that we've had wars in the past, but we've never seen it like this. And, and I hope that this will make a change for everyone. And I hope, inshallah, that this stops for them soon.
Inshallah.
But where do you see the Muslim community in, say, 10 years' time?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question which I've been grappling with for some time. I think we're at a crossroads. We could see two pathways. There's a pathway where Gaza is a temporary awakening, and then we become submissive, and we end up becoming just fodder for these political parties once again. And in 10 years' time, we make the same mistakes we've made over and over again. And you can imagine, inshallah, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us life, that you're hosting a show where we're once again talking about those naive Muslims who are going to have iftar with the new prime minister, who may even have a Muslim sounding name,
Yeah.
but who goes to war with another Middle Eastern country. So that's one pathway. But another pathway, which I feel we're inshallah on already, that pathway is that we're resilient, and our community engages, and our community is able to make an effective impact. And we've got politicians in parliament who really stand for our causes, and we've got community action, and we've got Muslim businessmen and women who are putting together funds to help political activity and to help broader advocacy and activity amongst younger Muslims in universities.
Yeah.
We have got the resources. So what I found in the last 7 months is often we have got resources, we've got people with money, we've got people with talent, and putting them together is sometimes the task that we can achieve.
Mm.
And when you get these people together and you get a good strategy, then we can actually achieve a lot in our field. So my view is that I feel in 10 years' time, inshallah ta'ala, we will be a far stronger and more resilient community, and more politically, inshallah, active, and a community that really does begin to make an effective impact on the political system here. I don't believe in the pathway, and people say this all the time to me when we send out a video, and I'm sure you get it, Muslims are going to disappear, and they're going to realize that, they're active now, and then they're going to go back to their lives. That's you can claim that, but that's a sign of defeatism. I mean, I recently came across, there was a conversation I had, and someone put in the group that oh, it's never going to change, and we're never going to get this guy elected. And my answer to them is, well, that's because you're not doing anything about it. You're just saying that it's never going to change. If you are out there engaging and changing and developing and organizing, then maybe things will change, right? So it's not for you to say other Muslims are docile. It's for you to be non-docile and to stop WhatsApping and to actually get out on the streets and actually make a difference. So I think I see hope in the next 10 years' time, inshallah.
Yeah, so do I. And I think with everything that's happening in Palestine, the one good thing that's come out of this is to see us come together as an Ummah. And it is a turning point. I do genuinely believe that this is a turning point for Muslims, that we've really truly seen who we are in the world. And for the people that are non-Muslims, a lot of people don't see us as human. They see us as subhuman. And I think that has been the turning point. And I hope that, that it stops the genocide. But I think whatever the outcome, I don't think we will ever forget this. And I don't think we will ever just go back to normality, because there's just too much has happened for that to happen. So inshallah, I hope that the path goes down the right way. And inshallah, the Ummah prospers and flourishes and has a positive impact on the lives of fellow Muslims, and as well non-Muslims too. Brother, thank you so much for your time and your valuable insights. And I'm really glad that we did this, because I think this will educate a lot of people. And I think these are important issues that we need to discuss, but we also need to get other people discussing. And inshallah, people watch this, they will discuss it with their family members. And this is word of mouth. A lot of the time, that's the way that we can make an impact, is word of mouth. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you and protect you and your family, inshallah, and grant you much, much success in everything that you do.
And to you, and jazakallah khair, and thank you very much. And it's things like this, the more we engage in these conversations, the more we spread virtuous knowledge, the better, inshallah, the better our situation will be in the coming years. So jazakallah khair to you for all that you do as well, inshallah.
Thank you. I just want to say, sorry, I had somebody's just Hussein Fahmi said barakallah feek. Thank you for your comment. Thank you for everyone that watched and commented, and jazakallah khair, brother. I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful summer, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.